He had always believed that the land he inherited was more than just a piece of property. It was a living connection to his family's history, a place where generations had worked tirelessly, planting seeds, tending the soil, and watching life grow. Every morning, he would walk through the fields, feeling the rough texture of the soil under his hands and smelling the faint scent of the earth after a fresh rainfall. The land had taught him patience, humility, and the quiet satisfaction that comes from creating something with your own hands. It wasn't about money or status. It was about roots and legacy. For years, life on the farmland had been simple but fulfilling. The small farmhouse, though modest, held countless memories of laughter, hard work, and quiet evenings spent watching the sunset over the fields. The crops varied from season to season, but each plant held significance. He had learned the rhythms of the seasons, the way the soil breathed, and how the rain could both nourish and destroy. Neighbors often admired his dedication, commenting on how the land seemed to thrive under his care. It was a point of pride, but pride tempered with respect for something far bigger than himself. Then, slowly, things began to change. It started with letters that arrived in the mailbox, official-looking and stamped with the insignia of the Homeowners, association that had recently taken a more active role in the community. The letters were polite, almost too polite, raising concerns about fence placement, crop height, and community appearance. At first he thought it was a misunderstanding, an overzealous HOA board trying to enforce minor rules. He responded with calm explanations, citing property lines and historical maps, confident that reason would prevail. But the letters kept coming, each one more insistent than the last. They began suggesting fines, warning of potential legal action, and questioning his right to use the land as he always had. A sense of unease began to grow. What was meant to be a peaceful, rooted life on the land was slowly turning into a maze of rules and threats that felt arbitrary and unfair. He tried to speak with board members in person, hoping that face-to-face conversations would clear up the confusion. Unfortunately, meetings were dismissive. Some members barely looked at him, while others repeated the same lines about community regulations as if reading from a script. Then came the day when he noticed the survey stakes, thin, bright markers that had appeared overnight, punctuating his fields like intruders. They didn't belong to him, yet they marked areas that had been his for decades. Questions swirled in his mind. Had the HOA gained some sudden power he didn't know about? Were these stakes a harmless precaution or a precursor to something far worse? He checked county records, compared maps, and consulted historical documents. But nothing he found supported the HOA's claims. The land had always been clearly in his name, untouched by any formal restriction from the association. Despite this, crews began to arrive. At first, it was small teams, trimming hedges along the property line or measuring areas with tape measures. Then it escalated. Heavy equipment started clearing small patches, removing fences, and even leveling areas that had been carefully planted. Crops that had taken months to grow were destroyed in hours. The sense of violation was intense. The land that had always felt alive under his care now seemed to shiver with loss, as if it could feel the injustice done to it. He confronted the crews, showing them deeds and documents proving ownership. They shrugged, insisting they were acting under HOA authority. Neighbors began to notice. Some offered sympathetic looks or whispered advice, but few were willing to intervene openly. Fear of the OSA's power hung over the community like a cloud. The isolation was suffocating. He felt trapped, as though the very ground beneath his feet had been called into question. At night, he would sit in the farmhouse, staring at the dark fields, wondering how something so permanent could suddenly be so threatened. Sleep became difficult, and the weight of uncertainty settled heavily on his shoulders. He began documenting everything. Photos of the land before and after the crews arrived, copies of letters, notes from meetings, even recordings of conversations where board members made claims about property that was undeniably his. The meticulous work provided a small sense of control, a way to fight back without letting emotions take over. It was painstaking. But he reminded himself that clarity and proof would be his strongest allies if the battle escalated. As days turned into weeks, the situation worsened. The HOA posted notices in public spaces, implying that parts of the farmland were no longer private. The community seemed to accept these claims without question. Some friends began to distance themselves, wary of angering the association. The loneliness was stinging. Yet, through the frustration and heartbreak, he felt something else growing, a quiet determination that he would not let his family's land be stolen without a fight. The emotional connection to the land, the memories rooted in every blade of grass and row of crops, had transformed into a protective resolve. He sought advice from local authorities, agricultural experts, and legal consultants. Each conversation revealed small cracks in the HOA's claims. Historical maps contradicted their statements. Past approvals had lapsed or never been legally filed, and certain actions they had taken violated state regulations. Every new piece of information strengthened his belief that the land was legally his and that the HOA had overstepped its authority. It was a slow process of building confidence, but each step made him feel less like a victim and more like a guardian preparing to defend something precious. Even amidst this turmoil, he never let go of the small joys that had always defined life on the farmland. He continued to tend the remaining crops, repair fences, and care for the animals. These actions were acts of resistance in themselves, a statement that the land was alive, nurtured, and loved. Regardless of the threats from the HOA, the rhythms of daily life, simple yet profound, provided grounding. He reminded himself that victory was not only about legal battles, it was about maintaining a connection to what mattered most. There were moments of doubt, of course. Late at night, when the fields were silent and the stars stretched endlessly overhead, he wondered if the fight was worth the stress. The isolation, the constant confrontation, the thought of losing the land entirely was unbearable. Yet within that fear, he found clarity. Losing without a fight would be a betrayal to the memory of his ancestors, to the work of decades, and to the identity he had built around this land. The stakes were high, but so was the commitment to justice, fairness, and the simple truth that some things cannot be taken without a rightful challenge. Through every step, he learned patience of a different kind. Not the kind measured by the seasons, but the patience required to carefully gather evidence, understand legal boundaries, and anticipate every move of those trying to usurp what was his. He realized that anger alone could not win this battle. Strategy, persistence, and careful documentation were essential. His days were long, filled with physical labor and mental calculations. At each night, he returned to the farmhouse, knowing that the fight was not in vain. In the community, whispers began to circulate. Some admired his tenacity quietly, while others feared the consequences of siding against the HOA. Rumors of lawsuits, property disputes, and even criminal charges swirled. But he remained focused. The farmland was his legacy, and every seed he planted, every fence he repaired, every note he documented was part of a larger effort to protect it. He understood the emotional and symbolic weight of his actions, not just for himself, but for the principle that private property cannot be taken lightly. By the end of this period, the land felt different. It still held its beauty, its history, and its memories, but it also bore marks of the struggle, flattened patches where crops were destroyed. Stakes marking disputed boundaries and signs of intrusion were constant reminders of the threat he faced. Yet rather than weakening his resolve, they fueled it. The connection to the land, deepened by generations and by his own years of care, had become a source of strength, guiding his every action and decision. He realized that this was only the beginning. The battle with the HOA was far from over. But he had discovered something vital, that injustice could be met with calm persistence, that history and legality could be powerful allies, and that the land he loved was worth every ounce of effort to defend. As he looked out over the fields at the end of another long day, he knew that the fight ahead would require courage, strategy, and unwavering dedication. And for the first time in weeks, despite the uncertainty and stress, he felt a quiet surge of hope. Knowing that he would face whatever came next without surrendering the land that meant everything to him, the days grew heavier as the landowner watched the changes unfold on his farmland. Every morning he walked through his fields, noting the areas that had been disturbed by the HOA's crews. Fences that had stood for decades were cut or removed. Rows of crops that he had nurtured for months were flattened or trampled. The sight left him both heartbroken and angry, but he knew that losing control of his emotions would not help him fight back. Instead, he focused on understanding the full extent of what was happening, trying to piece together a picture of the HOA's overreach. He started by taking detailed photographs of every corner of the farmland, capturing the damage and the boundaries as they were now marked. He made maps and diagrams, noting the differences between the current state and the original property lines. Each image, each sketch, became part of a growing collection of evidence. He realized that the more meticulously he documented the destruction, the stronger his position would be if he needed to take legal action. It was a methodical and patient process, one that required time, attention to detail, and a deep understanding of his own property. Despite the meticulous work, the HOA continued to push. Notices arrived almost daily, warning of fines and potential legal action. The letters were carefully worded, designed to intimidate and create confusion. They questioned everything from the height of the fences to the color of the crops, the placement of irrigation systems, and the use of certain equipment. Each notice seemed to stretch the rules further, pushing boundaries in ways that were not only unfair, but clearly outside their authority. It was a calculated effort to wear him down, to make him doubt his rights, and to force him into submission. Neighbors began to notice the tension. Some expressed sympathy quietly, while others avoided any contact out of fear. The community was slowly dividing itself into those who supported the HOA and those who quietly watched, unsure of where to stand. The landowner felt the isolation keenly, but he also recognized that standing alone might be necessary. Sometimes the weight of a righteous cause falls on a single individual. The land was his responsibility, and he could not allow the pressure of the association or the fear of others. To deter him, he attempted to communicate directly with the HOA board. Meetings were scheduled, and he prepared himself carefully, armed with historical maps, property deeds, and photographs. He spoke calmly, explaining the lineage of the land, its historical boundaries, and his legal right to manage it, as he had always done. But the response was dismissive. Board members seemed uninterested in hearing the facts. They repeated their claims as if they were unchallengeable truths, citing vague community regulations and imaginary agreements that had never been legally filed. The more he tried to reason, the more apparent it became that dialogue alone would not resolve the situation. As frustration mounted, he realized he needed to understand the HOA's motives. He began attending public meetings, listening carefully to conversations, observing the dynamics among board members, and noting how decisions were made. Patterns emerged. Decisions were made quickly, with little transparency, often bypassing proper procedures. It became clear that the association was relying on ambiguity and fear to push its agenda, expecting property owners to back down without question. Recognizing this strategy was empowering. Knowing the rules of the game allowed him to start planning his own moves carefully and deliberately. Meanwhile, the physical impact on the farmland was growing. Equipment left deep tracks in the soil, compacting areas that had once been fertile. Irrigation channels were blocked or rerouted, causing water to pool in some places while leaving other areas dry. Crops that had survived the initial intrusion began to wither under the stress. The land, which had always responded to care and attention, now seemed fragile and vulnerable. Watching the effects, he felt a deep sorrow. Yet, within that sorrow, there was a spark of determination. The land deserved a defender who would not give up. He sought advice from local farmers, who had faced disputes with neighbors or associations. They shared stories of bureaucracy, intimidation, and legal battles that dragged on for years. The landowner listened carefully, absorbing the lessons and preparing himself for what lay ahead. He learned that patience, documentation, and a careful understanding of the law were essential. Anger alone could not protect the land. Each piece of advice was like a tool, equipping him to navigate the increasingly complex situation at home. He continued his routine of caring for the remaining crops, repairing fences where possible, and maintaining the animals that depended on the land. Each action was an act of defiance, a statement that the land was alive and cherished, and that he would not let it be taken without a fight. These tasks offered a sense of normalcy, grounding him amidst the chaos. The daily work reminded him of what was at stake and strengthened his resolve. At night, reflected on the history of the land, he remembered stories told by his elders of how the land had survived droughts, storms, and years of labor. It had endured hardships that were far greater than the current conflict. This perspective provided comfort. The land had survived, and with careful planning and determination, it could survive this challenge too. The connection to his ancestors, to the legacy of work and care, became a source of emotional strength that he carried into each new day. The emotional toll was undeniable. There were moments of doubt, when the stress and isolation felt overwhelming. He worried about the legal battles, the mounting costs, the possibility that the HOA might find a loophole to enforce its claims. Sleep became elusive, and he often found himself wandering the fields in the dark, staring at the land that seemed to hold both his past and his future. Yet even in the quietest, most uncertain moments, the sense of responsibility remained. The land needed someone who would fight for it. He would not abandon it. He began consulting legal experts, bringing them into the situation to analyze the HOA's claims. Each conversation revealed small cracks in the association's authority. Maps, old deeds, and property surveys contradicted the HOA's statements. Rules cited in their letters were outdated, improperly filed, or non-existent. Every piece of evidence strengthened his case, giving him hope and clarity. It was a slow, methodical process, requiring careful attention and strategic thinking. But it became the foundation of his defense. Even as the legal work progressed, the HOA continued to assert its influence. Notices of fines, threats of liens, and references to imaginary agreements arrived regularly. The landowner learned to approach each communication with calm and scrutiny, avoiding knee-jerk reactions. He recorded every interaction, maintaining meticulous logs of phone calls, meetings, and letters. Each record became a shield against the uncertainty the HOA tried to create, a tool to assert his rights and protect his land. Neighbors watched quietly. Some approached with encouragement, sharing stories of resistance and resilience. Others kept their distance, worried about the consequences of being associated with the conflict. The community was polarized, but the landowner found strength in the small acts of solidarity. Even brief words of support reinforced his belief that standing up for what was right, even alone, could have an impact. It became clear that the battle was not just about property, but about principles, fairness, and the courage to defend what is rightfully yours. In the midst of these challenges, he discovered a renewed sense of purpose. The conflict with the HOA revealed his own strength and resilience. He realized that protecting the land was about more than property. It was about preserving a connection to history, culture, and identity. Each obstacle he faced reinforced the importance of preparation, careful planning, and unwavering commitment. The struggle was difficult, but it also became an opportunity for growth, self-discovery, and the reaffirmation of values he had always held dear. As weeks passed, he began to notice subtle changes in the HOA's behavior. Meetings became more cautious, communications more measured. It seemed they were beginning to recognize that he was not going to back down. The careful documentation, strategic planning, and unwavering commitment to the land were sending a message. This was not a battle they could win through intimidation or fear. The quiet strength he displayed was making an impact. Even if the HOA did not openly acknowledge it, the land itself seemed to respond to his persistence. While some areas remained damaged, others began to recover under his care. New shoots appeared where crops had been destroyed. Fences were repaired and water systems restored. The land, resilient and enduring, mirrored his own determination. It became a partner in his struggle, a living reminder that with patience, care, and effort, recovery and justice were possible. He realized that this stage of the battle, being observant, documenting, and maintaining the land, was crucial. The HOA's overreach had exposed weaknesses in their authority, and he was learning to exploit those weaknesses with precision and intelligence. The conflict was no longer just reactive. He was becoming proactive, shaping the narrative, preparing evidence, laying the groundwork for a legal confrontation that he now understood would be necessary. The combination of patience, strategy, and emotional resilience was transforming the challenge into an opportunity for victory. Late at night, he would sit on the porch of the farmhouse, looking across the fields and reflecting on the journey so far. The stars stretched across the sky, and the silence of the night contrasted sharply with the chaos of the days. He understood that the fight was far from over, but he also knew that he had built a foundation of strength, knowledge, and evidence that would carry him through the next stages. The emotional connection to the land, the history it represented, and the work he had invested in it all coalesced into a quiet determination that nothing could shake. Despite the ongoing conflict, he never let go of hope. Each new day brought opportunities to strengthen his position, repair damage. The landowner knew that words alone would not reclaim what had been threatened. He had spent weeks documenting the HOA's actions, analyzing their letters, and mapping the altered boundaries of his farmland. Each day brought new challenges, as the association seemed determined to prove their authority. But he had learned that careful preparation was his strongest ally. Anger might feel satisfying for a moment, but evidence and strategy could win the battle in the long term. He began consulting a legal expert who specialized in property disputes. They reviewed every document he had gathered, from old deeds to survey records, and pointed out weaknesses in the HOA's claims. The lawyer explained that the HOA had no legal basis to alter the land or remove fences, and that their letters and notices were more intimidation than law. This information was empowering. The landowner realized that he had the means to challenge the HOA, but he needed patience and precision to do it correctly. With renewed determination, he delved deeper into the history of the land. He examined records going back decades, uncovering old maps and plats filed with the county. Each document confirmed that the property had remained under his family's ownership without any legal encumbrances. He cross-referenced these maps with current survey data and photographs of the farmland, creating a clear visual representation of the discrepancies caused by the HOA's interference. The evidence was mounting. He felt more confident than ever that the land was rightfully his. The HOA, however, continued their aggressive actions. Equipment appeared on the land without notice, clearing brush, cutting down old trees, and leveling soil. Crops that had survived previous intrusions were again damaged, leaving the landowner frustrated but not defeated. He documented every incident, taking photographs and recording video whenever possible. Each act of documentation was a small victory, a way to prove the truth of what was happening and to counter the HOA's false narrative, in addition to legal consultation. He sought the advice of neighbors and local farmers who had experience with property disputes. They shared stories of lengthy battles, some of which had ended in victory and others in frustration. He listened carefully, learning which tactics were effective and which were likely to backfire. Each conversation reinforced the importance of staying calm, meticulous, and focused on the evidence. Emotional reactions could be used against him in court, so he worked hard to maintain a composed and deliberate approach as he worked to protect the farmland. He also focused on repairing what had been damaged. Fences were rebuilt, irrigation channels cleared, and remaining crops tended with care. Even as the HOA tried to disrupt his efforts, he persisted in nurturing the land. These actions were more than practical repairs. They were symbolic statements that the land was alive, cared for, and worth fighting for. Each small victory restored a sense of normalcy and control. The legal preparation required extensive attention. He organized his files, labeling each document, photograph, and note carefully. He created timelines of the HOA's actions, showing a clear pattern of overreach and intimidation. He drafted letters to the association, calmly pointing out legal boundaries and requesting that they cease their unauthorized activities. While the HOA often ignored these communications, having a clear documented record of attempts at resolution was essential. It would demonstrate to the court that he had sought peaceful solutions before escalating the matter. Late at night, he often walked the fields alone, reflecting on the journey so far. The land was both his sanctuary and the battleground. The destruction caused by the HOA left visible scars, but it also fueled his resolve. He thought about his ancestors who had worked these fields, enduring hardships far greater than this conflict. Their perseverance became a source of strength, reminding him that the land had survived before and could survive again. The history of the farmland added weight to his determination and underscored the importance of defending it, while he continued to prepare legally. He also began to observe the HOA's internal dynamics more closely. Board meetings revealed divisions among members, some of whom questioned the aggressive tactics, while others pushed forward with intimidation. Understanding these dynamics helped him anticipate their moves and strategize effectively. He realized that winning the battle required not only legal evidence but also a keen awareness of the personalities and motivations within the association. Neighbors began to approach him more frequently, some offering help with repairs, others sharing documents or information about past property disputes in the area. This small network of support became invaluable, providing both practical assistance and emotional encouragement. He realized that, even in the midst of isolation, there were allies willing to stand quietly alongside him. Their contributions reinforced the idea that defending what is right often requires a combination of personal effort and community support. As the legal case slowly took shape, the landowner found himself becoming more disciplined. Each day was carefully planned, documenting the land, tending crops, consulting legal experts, and monitoring the HOA's activities. The routine provided structure and purpose, keeping frustration and anxiety from overwhelming him. He found a balance between defending his rights and nurturing the land itself, recognizing that both were essential to preserving the integrity of his property. One morning, he discovered that new stakes had appeared in a previously untouched section of the farmland. The HOA was attempting to claim additional areas, pushing the boundaries further. He carefully measured and photographed the area, noting every detail. Each new intrusion was frustrating, but it also reinforced the importance of precise documentation. He realized that the more meticulously he recorded their actions, the stronger his case would be in court. Every photograph, every note, became a piece of armor in the fight for his land. He began to draft detailed reports, combining maps, photographs, and written descriptions into organized files. Each report clearly illustrated the discrepancies between the HOA's claims and the legal reality. These reports were not only for his lawyer but also for potential use in court, where visual evidence and clear timelines could have a powerful impact. The act of creating these reports gave him a sense of control, transforming the overwhelming challenge into a structured and manageable process. At the same time, he remained aware of the emotional impact of the conflict. The constant stress, the feeling of being watched, and the uncertainty about the future were heavy burdens. He found ways to manage these emotions, taking breaks to walk the fields, care for animals, reconnect with the land in quiet, meditative moments. These breaks were essential, allowing him to maintain clarity, focus, and resilience in the face of ongoing challenges. The HOA continued to send notices and warnings, but he responded with calm, factual letters backed by evidence. Each response reinforced his position and demonstrated that he was prepared to defend his property through lawful means. He avoided emotional language, focusing instead on facts, documentation, and clear references to property law. This approach, while time-consuming, ensured that his responses could not be used against him in court and highlighted the HOA's lack of legal foundation. Through careful observation and documentation, he began to anticipate the HOA's tactics. They seemed to rely on intimidation, hoping that the sheer volume of letters, fines, and threats would cause property owners to give in. By remaining calm and prepared, he was able to neutralize their strategy. He recognized that consistency, accuracy, and patience were his strongest tools. Each day of methodical preparation brought him closer to the point where he could assert his rights definitively. He also researched legal precedents in similar cases, learning how other property owners had successfully defended their land against overreaching associations. These stories were both instructive and inspiring, showing that persistence, documentation, and careful legal strategy could lead to victory. Each precedent reinforced his belief that he could protect his land and that justice could be achieved, even against a powerful and seemingly unyielding organization. As weeks passed, the landowner noticed subtle changes in the community. Some neighbors who had previously feared involvement began to speak quietly about the HOA's overreach. While no one openly challenged the board, there was a growing awareness that the association's actions were aggressive and potentially illegal. This quiet shift provided a sense of validation and reinforced the importance of his efforts. His meticulous work was not only protecting his land but also setting an example for others who might face similar challenges in the future. The land itself continued to respond to his care. Damaged areas slowly began to recover. New crops took root, and fences were rebuilt. These tangible signs of restoration were encouraging, reminding him that the land could survive the conflict if nurtured carefully. Each repair and each new plant became a symbol of resilience and determination, reinforcing the emotional connection that had always motivated his actions. As the preparation for legal action reached a critical point, he realized that the fight was no longer just about the land. It was about justice, fairness, and standing up against overreach. The HOA's aggressive actions had revealed a larger issue: the importance of defending property rights and the need for diligence in protecting what is rightfully yours. This realization strengthened his resolve, providing a deeper purpose for the battle ahead. Late at night, sitting on the porch and gazing across the fields, he felt a mix of exhaustion and determination. The challenges had been immense, the isolation difficult, but the groundwork for victory was in place. He had documented every action, prepared evidence, consulted experts, and nurtured the land through adversity. The next phase, the legal confrontation, would require focus, courage, and strategy. But he was ready. The land was his, and he would do everything necessary to ensure that it remained. Morning of the first court appearance arrived with a strange mixture of tension and calm determination. The landowner had spent months gathering evidence, consulting legal experts, and meticulously documenting every action the HOA had taken against his property. Now, standing outside the courthouse, he felt the weight of all that preparation and the pressure of proving that his land was rightfully his. The sun rose slowly over the fields that he had nurtured, a quiet reminder of what was at stake. Every step toward the courtroom was heavy with responsibility, but also resolute with purpose. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was formal and intimidating. The HOA representatives were present, confident, and composed, expecting a quick victory. The board had arrived with their own legal counsel, presenting their case as if the facts they cited were absolute. But the landowner, armed with months of careful preparation, was ready. Every document, photograph, and map he had compiled was organized and ready to present. He had learned to remain calm, to speak with clarity, and to let the evidence speak louder than emotions. The judge entered, and proceedings began. The HOA representatives outlined their claims, citing supposed agreements and community regulations. They spoke confidently, attempting to convey authority and legitimacy. But when questioned by the judge, they struggled to provide concrete legal evidence. Their maps were outdated, their signatures questionable, and their claims did not align with official county records. Each point they tried to make fell apart under careful scrutiny. It became clear that their confidence was based more on intimidation than truth. When it was the landowner's turn to present his case, he stepped forward with a quiet confidence. He methodically laid out the evidence he had gathered. Historical maps showed uninterrupted ownership of the land. Photographs documented damage caused by the HOA. Deeds and surveys confirmed that the property boundaries were clearly defined and had not been altered by any legal agreement. Witnesses, including neighbors and local experts, testified to the long-standing ownership and the disruption caused by the association. Each piece of evidence built a narrative of fact, logic, and undeniable truth. The courtroom was silent as the evidence unfolded. The HOA representatives attempted to interrupt, to challenge, and to question. But the judge maintained focus on the documentation and testimony. Every attempt by the board to shift the narrative was met with calm clarification by the landowner and his legal team. The contrast was stark. The HOA relied on assumptions, hearsay, and intimidation, while the landowner relied on facts, clarity, and a patient, methodical approach. The judge's attention to detail made it clear that the truth was being recognized, and that the tactics of intimidation would not prevail here. As the day progressed, the landowner felt a growing sense of relief. The months of preparation, the meticulous documentation, and the careful consultation with experts were all coming together. He realized that his emotional connection to the land had given him strength. But it was the evidence and clarity of thought that were driving the legal victory. Each witness who testified added weight to the case, recounting the history of the land, the care it had received, and the disruption caused by the HOA's overreach. The narrative was undeniable. The land belonged to him. The HOA had acted outside its authority. The judge called for a recess, allowing both sides to review the evidence and consider their positions. Outside the courtroom, tension hung in the air. But the landowner used the time to breathe, reflect, and prepare for the next phase. He walked slowly through the courthouse halls, thinking about the land, the work that had been done, and the justice he was seeking. The months of struggle had not been easy, but each step of preparation had brought him closer to this moment. He felt a quiet confidence that justice would prevail. Returning to the courtroom, proceedings continued with the presentation of more detailed evidence. Legal experts explained the technicalities of property boundaries, zoning laws, and historical records. The HOA's attempts to counter the evidence grew weaker with each clarification. Every discrepancy they tried to claim was met with clear documentation and authoritative testimony. The landowner remained composed, presenting his case with clarity and precision, never letting frustration or anger interfere. The power of calm, consistent, and factual presentation became apparent to everyone in the room as testimony continued. The judge asked pointed questions about the HOA's authority and the legality of their actions. The board struggled to provide satisfactory answers, revealing gaps in knowledge, lapses in procedure, and instances of overreach. It became increasingly clear that the association had acted without proper legal basis, assuming power they did not possess. Each question highlighted the flaws in their approach, reinforcing the strength of the landowner's evidence. The courtroom, once tense with uncertainty, began to feel a shift toward acknowledgement of the truth. Witness after witness recounted their experiences. Neighbors described how the land had been a respected and cared-for property for generations, and how the HOA's interventions had caused disruption and stress. Local agricultural experts detailed the damage done to crops and soil, emphasizing the importance of proper care and maintenance. These voices, grounded in first-hand knowledge and expertise, created a compelling and credible narrative that the judge could not ignore. The story of the land, its care, and the HOA's overreach was unfolding with clarity and authority. Throughout the proceedings, the landowner remained engaged but measured. He responded to questions thoughtfully, presented documents with precision, and allowed the evidence to carry the weight of the argument. Emotional appeals were unnecessary. The facts themselves were persuasive. He had learned over months of struggle that preparation, patience, and careful strategy could overcome intimidation and false claims. The courtroom experience confirmed that truth. Diligence could triumph over coercion and assumption. As the day drew to a close, the judge reviewed the evidence presented. The contrast between the HOA's unsubstantiated claims and the landowner's meticulous documentation was clear. The HOA representatives looked uneasy, realizing that their assumptions and aggressive tactics were insufficient to convince the court. The landowner, on the other hand, felt a sense of quiet satisfaction. The months of careful work, the attention to detail, and the persistence were yielding results. Justice, it seemed, was within reach. In the days that followed, the judge conducted further review and scheduled additional testimony. Each session reinforced the validity of the landowner's case. Legal experts explained the boundaries, historical ownership, and rights in simple, understandable terms, making it clear that the HOA's claims were without legal foundation. The narrative was consistent, credible, and compelling. The judge's questions became more focused on remedy than on questioning the validity of the landowner's ownership, signaling a shift toward resolution. Outside the courtroom, the community watched quietly. Some neighbors expressed relief and admiration for the landowner's diligence. Others remained cautious, but the story of the battle spread, reinforcing the importance of standing up for one's rights. The landowner, while focused on the legal process, understood that his efforts had significance beyond his own property. The case had become a demonstration of resilience, preparation, and the power of evidence in defending what is rightfully yours. Through this process, the landowner also reflected on personal growth. The struggle with the HOA had tested patience, endurance, and emotional resilience. It had required balancing care for the land with strategic planning and legal preparation. The months of meticulous work had strengthened not only the case, but also his confidence and resolve. He realized that adversity could be transformative, providing lessons in diligence, perseverance, and the importance of standing firm in the face of unjust challenges. By the end of this phase, the evidence was irrefutable. The court had a clear picture of the land's ownership, the history of care and maintenance, and the disruptions caused by the HOA. Every attempt by the board to claim authority had been countered with documentation, expert testimony, and logical argument. The courtroom had shifted from uncertainty to acknowledgement of the facts. With the judge fully aware of the legal and moral weight of the landowner's case, the landowner left the courthouse each day with a sense of cautious optimism. He knew the battle was not yet fully concluded, but the foundation for victory was firmly established. Months of preparation, attention to detail, and emotional resilience had created a strong position. The land, which had been the source of worry and stress, now stood as a symbol of determination, perseverance, and the potential for justice to prevail. Each step taken, each document presented, and each witness called reinforced the inevitability of a fair outcome. Returning home to the farmland, he walked the fields with renewed appreciation. The land had been tested, but it had endured, and so had he. Every row of crops, every repaired fence, and every carefully tended section of soil represented both past effort and future hope. The battle in the courtroom mirrored the care and attention given to the land itself. As he continued to nurture the fields, he felt a growing sense of empowerment, knowing that the truth and diligent preparation could overcome intimidation and injustice. He also recognized the importance of community and quiet support. The neighbors who had offered advice, shared documents, or simply watched with respect played a role in sustaining morale. Their presence, though subtle, reinforced the idea that standing up for what is right is a shared responsibility, even if others cannot participate directly. The landowner understood that his actions were part of a larger narrative about fairness, responsibility, and defending what is rightfully yours. As proceedings continued, the landowner maintained a careful balance between legal strategy and emotional resilience. The land itself was a Gurtha. Day of the final ruling arrived with a mix of anticipation and quiet resolve. The landowner had prepared for months, collecting evidence, documenting every intrusion, and consulting legal experts. Now, the culmination of his patience, strategy, and perseverance would be tested. He walked through the fields one last time before heading to the courthouse. Feeling the wind against his face and the soil under his feet, every tree, crop, and fence carried the memory of effort, care, and resilience. This land had been his life, and he had fought to protect it. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was tense. The HOA representatives had assembled, appearing confident but noticeably wary. Their legal counsel attempted to present the same claims that had been weakened and challenged throughout the previous hearings. The landowner, however, remained composed. He had learned the power of calm and preparation. He knew that the evidence he had gathered, combined with the testimony of witnesses and the history of the property, would speak louder than any words of intimidation. The judge reviewed the case with attention to detail. Each document, photograph, and historical record was considered. The evidence was clear and compelling. The land belonged to the landowner. The HOA had no legal authority to alter or claim any part of it, and the actions taken by the association had caused measurable damage. The courtroom was silent as the reality of the situation became undeniable. The HOA's confidence wavered as they realized their claims lacked legal foundation. Witnesses who had observed the farmland and its care over the years provided their accounts. Neighbors spoke of the landowner's dedication, the long-standing history of ownership, and the respect the property commanded within the community. Agricultural experts explained the damage caused by the unauthorized alterations, emphasizing the importance of soil care, crop protection, and proper land management. Each testimony reinforced the narrative of legitimacy, dedication, and rightful ownership. The judge addressed the HOA representatives directly, asking pointed questions about the legality of their actions and the authority they claimed to have. Their responses were hesitant, vague, and often contradictory. Every attempt to justify their overreach was met with factual clarification from the landowner and his legal team. The contrast between prepared, evidence-backed argument and weak, unfounded claims became starkly apparent. The judge's expression revealed growing recognition that the balance of the case favored the landowner. Throughout the proceedings, the landowner maintained a composed presence. He answered questions clearly, presented evidence systematically, and refrained from emotional outbursts. His strategy of preparation and patience had proven its worth. Each carefully organized document and photograph was displayed with precision. Illustrating the depth of his diligence and the extent of the HOA's overreach, the courtroom became a place where facts, history, and clarity dictated the outcome, rather than assumptions or intimidation.